small town was quiet that morning. The streets were empty except for a few early workers heading to their jobs. In a tiny house on the edge of town, a young girl sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the cracked wall. She was small for her age, with tangled hair and shoes that had seen better days. Her clothes were patched, and her hands were rough from washing dishes at the foster home kitchen. But even with all of that, there was a softness in her eyes, a spark that never went away, no matter how hard life seemed. Her mother had been sick for many months. The doctors had said she needed surgery, but the hospital bills were too high for the little money the girl had. She had watched her mother lie in the hospital bed, pale and tired, and she had felt a deep ache in her chest. Each day, she wished she could do something, anything, to help her mother. The thought of losing her filled her with fear and sadness. She ran her fingers along the old piano in the corner of the room. It was an old, beaten-up thing with keys that were chipped and sometimes stuck. But it had been her friend for as long as she could remember. Whenever she felt sad, she would sit there and play. The music didn't have to be perfect. It just had to come from her heart. She had learned to play by listening to songs on the radio and watching videos at the library, because she could not afford lessons. But somehow, her small hands made the piano sing. Today, she was thinking about the competition. A flyer had been posted at the community center. It was a talent contest with a prize that could cover her mother's surgery. Her eyes lit up as she read it again and again. She knew this could be her only chance. If she won, her mother could get the help she needed. The girl felt a mix of hope and fear. She had never played in front of a big crowd, and the thought of strangers watching made her stomach twist in knots. She practiced in the quiet of the morning. Her hands moved over the keys slowly at first, testing the notes. Then, she played the simple tune she had created herself, a melody that her mother hummed when she was a little girl. It was soft, gentle, and filled with love. As the music flowed, she closed her eyes and imagined her mother's smile. Imagined the hospital being far away. Imagined a life where her mother was healthy again. The melody was more than just notes. It carried all her dreams and fears. Time passed quickly. She barely noticed the sunlight streaming through the window or the sounds of the town outside. When she finally stopped, her fingers felt sore, but her heart was full. She knew she had something special, something that came from inside her. But the girl also knew that talent alone might not be enough. There were other children in the contest who had studied for years, whose hands glided over the keys with precision. She could only hope that her heart would speak louder than their skill. She packed a small bag with her few belongings and the sheet music she had written herself. Her foster mother, who was kind but tired, helped her adjust her worn coat. The girl took a deep breath and stepped out into the street. The town felt bigger than usual, almost intimidating, but she kept walking, thinking only of her mother. At the community center, she saw other contestants arriving. They were all polished and confident, with shiny instruments and perfect posture. Some whispered to each other, casting curious glances at the small girl with the patched coat. She felt a pang of nervousness, but she refused to let it show. She reminded herself why she was here. She was not here to impress anyone with fancy clothes or years of lessons. She was here for her mother. Backstage, she listened to the other performances. Some were talented, and the crowd clapped politely. She tried not to let herself be distracted. She focused on her simple tune, imagining the melody carrying her hopes. When it was her turn, her knees shook, and her heart pounded. She walked to the piano, her small hands trembling slightly as they hovered over the keys. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant. But as she continued, the music grew stronger, filled with emotion. She thought about the long nights by her mother's hospital bed, about the tiny moments of joy they had shared, about the love that kept her going. Each note carried a piece of her soul. The audience fell silent. People stopped whispering and turned their attention to the small girl. Even the judges leaned forward, curious about the music that was not flashy or complex but strangely moving. The melody was simple, yet it spoke in a way that words could not. It was a story of hope, struggle, and love, all told through the gentle pressing of keys. When she finished, there was a brief pause. She opened her eyes, unsure if the audience had understood her. And then came the clapping, hesitant at first, then louder, growing into cheers. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. The girl felt a wave of relief, but also more nervousness. This was only the beginning. She knew she had captured attention, but now she had to keep going. The competition was not over yet, and her mother's life depended on her performance. Back in her small corner of the room, she hugged her sheet music tightly. She whispered a quiet promise to her mother that she would do her best, that she would make sure her mother got the help she needed. She felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and determination. This was more than a contest. It was her chance to change everything. As the morning turned to afternoon, she continued to prepare, replaying the tune over and over, making small adjustments, trying to make it sound perfect without losing its heart. Every time she played, she imagined her mother clapping along, imagining the hospital bills being paid, imagining a future where they would be together again without fear. The other contestants continued to perform, some with dazzling skills, some with elaborate tricks. But the girl remained focused on her own music, on the story she wanted to tell. She did not need fancy notes or fast fingers. She needed sincerity, and that was something no one could teach. Hours passed, and finally the time came for the second round. She was nervous, but she felt stronger now. She had felt the music in her bones, had carried it through the quiet streets of her town, through the lonely nights, through the fear and hope. She knew that when she sat at that piano, she was not just playing for herself. She was playing for her mother, for the chance at a new beginning. When she walked on stage again, the lights seemed brighter, the audience larger. But she did not look at them. She looked at the piano, at the keys that had been her friends, at the melody that had carried her this far. She sat down, took a deep breath, and let her fingers dance over the keys. The music was her heart speaking aloud, telling a story that could not be ignored. And in that moment, she forgot everything else. Her nerves, the competition, the world outside. There was only the music, and the hope that it could save the one person she loved more than anything in the world. The community hall was buzzing with excitement. The audience was larger than she had expected, with rows of chairs filling the room and parents, teachers, and local residents whispering to each other. The stage was set with a long row of chairs for the judges, and at the center, a grand piano gleamed under the lights. The girl felt a flutter in her stomach as she watched the other contestants practice. Some were tuning their instruments, others whispering last-minute encouragements to each other. She stayed to the side, quietly repeating the melody she had written in her mind. One of the judges caught her eye. He was a tall man, wearing a crisp suit, with an expression that was both serious and unreadable. He did not smile, and he did not seem impressed by anything around him. Rumor had it that he was a millionaire who had made his fortune in business. People said he was strict, with little patience for mistakes. The girl had heard the whispers backstage. Some of the older contestants muttered about how impossible it would be to impress him. They said he only liked perfect performances and that he was cold to anyone who seemed inexperienced. The thought made her nervous, but she reminded herself that she was not there for him. She was there for her mother. The first contestant stepped forward. It was a boy who looked about the same age as her. He played a fast, complicated piece, his fingers moving quickly across the keys. The audience clapped politely when he finished, and the judges nodded, noting his skill. The girl watched carefully, noticing how his posture and precision made him appear confident. Then came a girl who performed a dramatic classical piece. Her hands were graceful, and the audience seemed impressed. Still, the millionaire judge barely moved. He scribbled something on his scorecard without looking up. The girl wondered what he thought of the music, if he thought anything at all. She felt small among all these polished performers, but she reminded herself that she had something different. Her music was not about showing off. It was about telling a story of love and hope. She walked to the piano and sat down quietly, her heart beating fast. The audience had grown silent after the last performance, waiting for the next contestant. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and pictured her mother. She imagined her mother smiling, imagining her mother healthy again. The thought gave her courage. As she began to play, the first notes were soft and hesitant, almost shy. Her hands moved slowly at first, finding the familiar keys. The melody was simple, but it carried a feeling that was hard to describe. The audience listened, leaning forward, curious about this small girl who seemed so fragile. Slowly, the music grew more confident, more alive. Her fingers moved with a quiet determination, telling the story of her nights at the hospital, the long walks home, the worry she carried in her chest. The millionaire judge, who had seemed so indifferent, suddenly shifted in his chair. He raised his eyes from his scorecard and looked at the girl. Something about the way she played caught his attention. It was not the complexity of the music, nor the speed of her fingers, but the emotion behind it. He frowned slightly, trying to hide the reaction that surprised him. He had seen many talented performers, but rarely had he seen someone convey so much feeling with such a simple tune. The audience was quiet, listening as the melody filled the room. Some people smiled softly, remembering moments from their own lives. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the sincerity of the performance. The girl played with all her heart, unaware of the attention she was drawing. All she could think about was her mother, and how she wanted to make her well again. When she finished the simple tune, she hesitated for a moment. The hall was still. No one moved, no one spoke. Then came a gentle applause from the back of the room, growing slowly as more people clapped. The millionaire judge leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He did not smile, but there was a softness in his eyes that had not been there before. He looked at the girl in a way that suggested he was thinking, reflecting, remembering something he had long tried to forget. Backstage, she felt a mixture of relief and fear. She had done what she came to do, but she knew the competition was not over. The next round would be even harder. Other contestants were whispering about her performance, some impressed, some doubtful. One boy muttered that it was just a simple tune, nothing special. But the girl knew better. She had put her heart into every note, and she felt stronger because of it. As she waited for the second round, she practiced again, repeating the melody quietly to herself. She imagined her mother's face, her pale smile, and the hope that she might see her healthy again soon. Every note was a promise, every chord a wish. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her, preparing for the moment she would play again. The hall seemed to grow larger as the day went on. More people arrived, curious to see the next performances. The girl watched the audience from backstage, noticing families with children, elderly couples, and even a few teenagers who looked excited. The atmosphere was alive with anticipation. She knew that when she went on stage again, she would have to be brave. She would have to make the audience and the judges feel what she felt inside. When the time came for the next round, she walked on stage with her small bag in hand. She felt the lights on her face and the quiet murmur of the audience. She took her place at the piano and looked at the keys. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she closed her eyes and remembered why she was here. She was here for her mother. She was here for the chance to save her life. And she was here for the music, which had always been her friend. The first few notes of the new piece were soft, almost hesitant, but full of emotion. She had written this melody herself, inspired by the memories of her mother humming to her when she was a child. The audience listened in silence, caught by the simple yet beautiful tune. The millionaire judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable but his attention fully on her. He had seen many performers, but there was something different about this one. Something that made him pause. As she continued, the music grew more powerful, more confident. Each note told a story of struggle, of love, of hope. She thought about the hospital, about the long nights, about the fear of losing her mother. She let all of that pour into the music. The audience was moved, some wiping tears from their eyes, some holding their hands over their hearts. The girl was not aware of them. She was lost in the music, in the story she was telling. When she finished, There was a brief, stunned silence. The hall seemed to hold its breath, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then the applause began, slowly at first, then growing louder and louder. People stood, clapping and cheering, moved by the heartfelt performance. The millionaire judge remained seated for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he scribbled something on his scorecard, looking at the girl with a new respect. He had been impressed, genuinely impressed, by the simplicity and honesty of her music. Backstage, the girl smiled quietly to herself. She had done it. She had played from her heart, and it had reached the hearts of others. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a renewed determination. The competition was not over, but she knew she had captured attention. She had made people feel something, and that was more important than any perfect note or fancy technique. As the day drew to a close, she thought about her mother and the hope that this competition could bring. She knew that she had taken the first step towards saving her mother's life, and she felt a quiet strength within her. No matter what happened next, she had proven to herself that her music had power. It could touch people, it could inspire hope, and it could carry her dreams. The girl left the hall that evening, her heart full and her spirit lifted. She walked slowly through the quiet streets, thinking about the next day, about the next round, about the challenge ahead. But she also thought about her mother, about the love that kept her going, and about the simple melody that had started to change everything. She knew that the journey was just beginning, and she was ready to face whatever came next with courage and determination. The morning of the third day of the competition arrived, and the girl could barely sleep. Her mind was alive with thoughts of the piano, the melody, and her mother. She rose early, washing her face in cold water to wake herself, and ran her fingers over the edge of the piano in her small room. The instrument felt rough and old, but she had learned to trust it. The notes might not all sound perfect, but the music could carry her feelings, and that was what mattered most. At the community center, the atmosphere was electric. Word had spread about the small girl who had captured the attention of the tough millionaire judge. Some contestants looked nervous now, whispering among themselves, while others looked curious, wondering if the rumors were true. The hall was filled with spectators eager to see her next performance. The judges sat in their chairs, papers and scorecards in front of them, ready for the day's events. The millionaire judge, as usual, sat with a straight face, hands folded, watching quietly. He had seen many performances, but he could feel that something different was about to happen. The girl waited backstage, clutching her sheet music tightly. She took deep breaths, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. She reminded herself why she was here. Not to impress anyone with flashy notes or speed, but to tell a story. Her story, through the music, was about hope, about love, about her mother who needed her. She whispered quietly to herself, practicing the tune once more in her mind, feeling each note as if it carried a piece of her soul. When it was her turn, the stage felt enormous. The bright lights shone down, and the audience seemed endless. She walked slowly to the piano, her small frame feeling fragile under the weight of expectation. As she sat down, she could feel her hands tremble. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her mother sitting beside her, smiling softly, and it gave her strength. She was ready. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and she began to play. The first few notes were soft and hesitant, but full of feeling. The simple tune that had carried her through so many lonely nights began to fill the room. The audience quieted, sensing that this was not just another performance. The music was gentle but powerful, simple but full of meaning. Every note seemed to speak directly to the heart. The millionaire judge, who had spent years building his fortune and seeing all kinds of talent, leaned forward. Something about the simplicity of the music caught his attention. It was not about skill or technique. It was about honesty, about feeling, about the story behind each note. He watched closely, intrigued by the small girl whose music seemed to rise above the competition. As she continued, the melody shifted slightly, becoming more confident and expressive. She played the tune she had created, inspired by her mother's gentle humming, but she added a few small variations of her own, letting her emotions guide her fingers. Each chord, each note, seemed to carry the weight of her worries, her love, and her determination. The audience felt it. Some people wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the raw emotion. Others sat in stunned silence, caught by the purity of the music. She lost track of time, her mind completely absorbed in the music. She thought about the nights she had spent practicing quietly in her small room, the long walks home, the hospital visits, and the hope that had kept her going. All of that poured out through her fingers, creating a connection with the audience and the judges that went beyond words. The hall seemed to hold its breath, hanging on every note, every pause, every gentle shift in the melody. When she reached the final chord, she held it a little longer than usual, letting it resonate throughout the room. The audience was silent for a moment, as if the music had stopped time itself. Then came the applause, soft at first, then growing louder and louder. People stood, clapping, cheering, some with tears still on their cheeks. The girl opened her eyes, feeling a mix of relief, joy, and nervous anticipation. She had done it. She had spoken through her music and people had listened. The millionaire judge did not clap immediately. He remained seated, staring at the piano and the girl with a thoughtful expression. He had been impressed not just by the performance, but by the courage and sincerity behind it. He had seen many children play the piano, some technically flawless, some flashy, but rarely had he seen a performance that was so pure, so human. He scribbled notes on his scorecard, a small smile appearing for the first time in days. Backstage, the girl felt a wave of exhaustion mixed with pride. She hugged her sheet music tightly, whispering a promise to her mother that she would keep going, no matter what. The other contestants gave her curious looks, some with admiration, others with doubt. But she did not care about them. She was focused on her next challenge, the next round, and the hope that this music could change everything for her mother. In the quiet moments between performances, she practiced quietly, repeating the melody, adjusting the tempo, adding small expressions to make the music even more heartfelt. She felt a connection to the piano like never before. It was more than an instrument. It was a bridge between her fears and her hopes, between her sadness and her dreams. Each note she played was a message, a plea, a wish that her mother could live. The day continued with more contestants taking the stage. Some were impressive, their performances technically perfect. Others were creative, adding flair and excitement. But the girl's performance lingered in the hearts of the audience. People whispered to each other about the small girl with the big talent, the girl who could make the piano sing in a way that touched everyone. Even the other contestants began to take notice, some with envy, some with admiration. As the final performances of the day approached, the girl felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew she had impressed some people, but the competition was far from over. She reminded herself that she was not just playing for the judges, not just playing for applause. She was playing for her mother, for hope, for the chance to make a difference. That thought gave her courage and focus. When she walked on stage for her final performance of the day, the hall seemed to quiet down in anticipation. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and let her fingers find the keys. The melody began softly, a gentle wave of sound that drew the audience in. As she played, she thought about her mother, imagining her smiling and healthy. She let that feeling guide her, letting the music grow in strength and emotion. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the simplicity and honesty of the performance. Some people had tears in their eyes, others held their hands to their chests, feeling the depth of the story behind the music. The millionaire judge leaned forward once again, his eyes fixed on the girl. He could feel the truth in every note, the courage and love that poured from her heart. For the first time, he seemed truly moved by a performance. When she reached the final note, she let it linger, resonating through the hall. The silence that followed was filled with awe and admiration. Then the applause came, louder than ever, a wave of appreciation that swept across the room. The girl smiled softly, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and determination. She had played from her heart, and the world had listened. Backstage, she hugged her sheet music again, whispering a quiet promise to her mother that she would continue to fight, to play, to hope. The day had been long, and her small body was tired, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She knew that the journey was far from over, but she had taken an important step. She had shared her story, touched the hearts of many, and even captured the attention of the stern millionaire judge. And in her heart, she felt that maybe, just maybe, things could begin to change. The next day, the girl arrived at the community center early, as usual. The morning light streamed through the windows, casting warm patterns on the floor. She paused for a moment, looking at the grand piano at the center of the stage. It looked brighter and more welcoming than ever. She ran her fingers lightly over the edge of the keys, feeling their familiar texture. Today was important. She could feel it. She had performed simple melodies before, but today she needed to show something more, something that carried the depth of her feelings, the weight of her hope for her mother. Backstage, the other contestants were busy preparing. Some were adjusting their instruments, others rehearsing quietly. She watched them for a moment but did not feel intimidated. She had learned long ago that talent alone did not guarantee victory. What mattered was honesty, passion, and courage. She clutched her sheet music, a small bundle of her heart and memories, and whispered to herself a promise to keep playing with all her love. The audience had grown larger. Families, neighbors, and even journalists had come to watch the competition. The atmosphere was alive with anticipation. The millionaire judge sat in his usual seat, observing quietly. He had seen many performers, but there was something about this girl that drew him in. He had seen her play the same melody twice before, and each time it had affected him deeply. There was a purity in her music, a story that could not be taught or copied. Today, he wondered what she would do next. When her turn arrived, she walked on stage, her small frame almost disappearing under the bright lights. She sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and let her hands hover above the keys. She closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her mother sitting beside her, smiling weakly but full of love. She reminded herself why she was here, not for fame or applause, not for the judges or the audience, but for her mother's life. The thought strengthened her resolve. She began to play softly at first, letting the melody she had created fill the hall. The notes were simple, but they carried a story of long nights, quiet hope, and love. The audience listened, captivated by the honesty in her performance. Some faces were wet with tears, some hands were pressed over hearts, and a few people whispered to each other, unable to find the right words to describe the feeling. The girl felt their emotions but did not let them distract her. She was focused on the music, on the story she wanted to tell. As the melody continued, she added subtle variations, letting her emotions guide the rhythm and flow. She thought about the fear she had felt when doctors had told her mother that surgery was urgent, about the sleepless nights she had spent worrying, about the small joys they had shared. Each note became a piece of her story, a reflection of her love and her courage. The audience felt it too, as if the music was speaking directly to them, bypassing words entirely. The millionaire judge leaned forward, his usual stoic expression softening. He had been impressed by her before, but today he felt something deeper. He remembered his own past, times when he had lost loved ones or had taken too long to express his feelings. The girl's music stirred something in him he had long buried. He listened carefully, noticing the way her small hands poured strength and emotion into each note. There was a message in the music that went beyond skill or perfection. It was human, raw, and real. As the performance progressed, the girl's confidence grew. She played with a quiet strength, each note carrying her love for her mother and her hope for the future. The audience was completely absorbed. Some people were moved to tears, others smiled through their emotions, and some sat in stunned silence, amazed by the depth of feeling in such a simple tune. The hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the final notes. When she reached the climax of her piece, she let the music soar, filling the room with emotion. The melody was no longer just a simple tune. It was a story of struggle, love, and hope that everyone in the hall could feel. She imagined her mother listening, imagining the joy that would come when she saw her daughter's success. Each chord was a prayer, each note a wish for healing. The audience responded instinctively, their applause growing even before the final note had ended. The final chord lingered, resonating through the hall. Silence followed, a quiet pause that made everyone catch their breath. Then the applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than any before. People stood, clapping and cheering, moved by the emotional depth of the performance. Tears ran down the faces of many in the audience, including the Millionaire judge. He did not clap immediately but sat in quiet reflection, moved by the courage and honesty of the girl on stage. He had been impressed before, but now he felt a deep respect for her talent and her heart. Backstage, she felt a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. Her fingers were sore, but her spirit was strong. She hugged her sheet music close, whispering a quiet promise to her mother that she would continue to play, continue to fight, and continue to hope. The day had been long, but she had achieved something more than she had ever expected. She had touched the hearts of many, including the one judge whose approval she had feared most. The other contestants looked at her differently now. Some nodded in respect, realizing that her music carried a story they could not compete with. Others looked worried, wondering how the small girl had managed to captivate the audience so completely. She paid them little attention. Her focus remained on the music, on her mother, and on the hope that this performance might be the step that changed everything. As the competition moved forward, the girl practiced quietly in the corners, preparing for the next round. She repeated her melody, adjusting the tempo slightly, letting her emotions guide the performance. Every note, every chord, was a reflection of her determination, her love, and her courage. She felt a deep connection to the piano, as if it were an extension of her heart. Each time she played, she imagined the joy it would bring to her mother and the chance to save her life. The Millionaire judge observed her from his seat, making notes and watching closely. He had seen many talented performers in his life, but rarely had he seen someone whose music could convey such depth and sincerity. He found himself reflecting on the choices he had made in his own life, the people he had neglected, and the moments he had taken for granted. The girl's music reminded him of what was truly important. It was a reminder that talent alone was not enough. It was the heart behind it that mattered. As the day came to a close, the girl left the stage feeling a mix of exhaustion and hope. She walked slowly through the quiet streets, thinking about the next day, about the next round, and about the journey that had brought her here. She knew that the hardest challenges were still ahead, but she also knew that she had the power to touch hearts and inspire change through her music. She had found her voice, and with it, she could carry her story and her hopes forward. That evening, she sat quietly by the piano in her small room, playing the melody again, letting the notes drift through the air. She thought about her mother, imagining her healthy and smiling, and felt a sense of determination unlike anything she had felt before. The music was no longer just a tune. It was a lifeline, a bridge between fear and hope, between despair and courage. She played until her fingers were tired, then rested, feeling a quiet confidence that tomorrow she would continue to move closer to her goal. She had discovered the true power of her music, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The fifth day of the competition felt heavier than the others. The community hall was filled to capacity, with people murmuring excitedly as they waited for the performances to begin. The girl arrived early, clutching her sheet music close to her chest. Her small shoes tapped lightly against the floor as she walked to her usual corner to warm up. She could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the audience, and the silent scrutiny of the judges. Today, she knew, would be the most important day of all. Backstage, the other contestants were buzzing with nervous energy. Some practiced frantically, trying to perfect every note, while others whispered words of encouragement to each other. The girl observed them quietly, taking in their energy but keeping her focus on the piano. She reminded herself that the other contestants' skill or confidence was not what mattered. What mattered was the story she wanted to tell, the emotion she wanted to share, and the hope she carried for her mother. The audience settled as the first performer of the day took the stage. A young boy played a complex piece, his fingers moving quickly and precisely. The audience clapped politely when he finished, but the applause seemed measured, as if they were waiting for something more. The millionaire judge scribbled notes on his scorecard, his expression thoughtful and unreadable. The girl watched carefully, taking mental notes on the pacing, the dynamics, and the attention the audience gave to each performer. Finally, it was her turn. She walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of the day and the hope of her mother pressing on her small shoulders. She approached the grand piano, sitting down and letting her fingers hover over the keys. The bright lights shone down, making the piano gleam, and the hall seemed impossibly large. But she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, imagining her mother sitting beside her, her eyes full of hope. That image gave her strength. She began to play softly at first, letting the simple melody she had created fill the hall. The notes were delicate, almost shy, but carried an undeniable emotion. The audience quieted, sensing the depth of the performance. She played with careful precision, letting the music rise and fall naturally. Each chord seemed to carry a piece of her heart, each note a fragment of her love and worry for her mother. As the melody continued, she allowed herself to become fully immersed in the music. She thought about the long nights she had spent practicing quietly in her room, the hospital visits, the fear that she might lose her mother. She poured all of her feelings into the performance, letting them guide her fingers over the keys. The audience listened intently, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles that reflected understanding and empathy. The girl's music spoke to them in a way that words never could. The millionaire judge, who had observed her performances before, leaned forward in his seat. He had seen many talented performers, but few had moved him as this girl did. Her music was raw and genuine, a reflection of her soul, not just her skill. He watched every movement of her small hands, the way she connected with the keys, the way the emotion flowed through her performance. He scribbled notes on his scorecard, his expression a mixture of admiration and reflection. For the first time, he found himself thinking beyond technical ability, recognizing the extraordinary power of heart and passion. As she played, the melody began to evolve. She added gentle variations, letting the emotion of each moment guide her choices. She thought about her mother, imagining her smile, imagining the relief and joy when she would be able to get the treatment she needed. The music grew stronger, yet remained tender, telling a story that everyone in the room could feel. The audience sat in rapt attention, some holding their breath, caught by the depth of feeling the small girl had brought to the stage. The climax of her performance approached, and she allowed herself to fully express the hope and love that had carried her through these days. Each note soared, echoing through the hall, filling it with a warmth that seemed to embrace everyone present. The audience responded instinctively, some rising to their feet, others wiping tears from their eyes. The millionaire judge sat quietly, watching closely, his usually stoic face softened by the power of the girl's music. When the final chord lingered in the air, the hall was silent for a heartbeat. Then, the applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than any before. People cheered, clapped, and some even stood in admiration. The girl smiled softly, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and nervous anticipation. She had done her best and the audience had felt it. She had told her story through her music, and it had reached the hearts of those who listened. Backstage, she hugged her sheet music tightly, whispering a quiet promise to her mother that she would continue to play, continue to hope, and continue to fight. She felt a sense of accomplishment, but also the awareness that the next decision would be critical. The judges would deliberate, and the outcome could change her mother's life. The other contestants looked at her differently now. Some nodded in respect, realizing that her music had touched something deeper than skill alone. Others whispered among themselves, wondering how this small girl had managed to move the audience so completely. She paid little attention to them. Her focus remained on her music and the hope it represented. The judges began their discussion. The room held its breath as the millionaire judge spoke. He described her performance as extraordinary, emphasizing the emotion, sincerity, and courage that she had conveyed. He pointed out that technical perfection was not the only measure of talent. Heart and honesty mattered just as much, if not more. His words resonated with the audience, who nodded in agreement and whispered their support. Finally, the decision was made. The girl's heart pounded as the announcement was read. She had won. She had captured the top prize. The audience erupted in cheers, and the millionaire judge rose from his seat, approaching the stage. He did not speak immediately but looked at her with a deep, thoughtful gaze. Then he said, quietly but firmly, that he would personally ensure her mother received the medical care she needed. The words seemed to hang in the air, filled with weight and meaning. The girl's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of relief and overwhelming joy. The audience clapped and cheered even louder, moved by the generosity and humanity of the gesture. The girl felt her knees weaken slightly, and she sat down, hugging her sheet music to her chest. She whispered a heartfelt thank you, her voice trembling with emotion. She thought of her mother, imagining the smile that would light up her face when she heard the news. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the prize, but for the recognition and understanding of her heart. In the days that followed, arrangements were made for her mother's treatment. The girl stayed close, helping and supporting her as best she could. The piano remained her companion, a source of comfort and strength. She continued to practice, not just for competitions, but for the love of music and the joy it brought to her and those around her. The millionaire judge, who had once been distant and stern, became a quiet supporter of her journey. He encouraged young talents, offering guidance and opportunities, inspired by the courage and honesty of the girl who had played a simple tune that had changed everything. He had learned that talent was not just about skill, but about heart, courage, and the ability to touch lives. The girl's life began to change in ways she had only dreamed of. She had won more than a competition. She had won hope, support, and a chance to create a better future for her mother. Her music continued to reach people, inspiring them with its sincerity and emotional power. She had discovered the true strength within herself, and with it, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that love, hope, and courage could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. After the announcement of her victory, the girl felt a wave of relief wash over her. For months, she had carried the weight of worry for her mother on her small shoulders, and now there was hope. The prize money, combined with the judge's generous offer, meant her mother would finally get the treatment she needed. She could hardly believe it, and yet, seeing the tears of joy in her own eyes, she knew it was real. The long nights, the quiet practice sessions, and the simple melodies she had poured her heart into had all led to this moment. The first step was getting her mother to the hospital. The girl sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand and listening to the steady beep of the monitors. Her mother, weak but smiling, looked at her daughter with gratitude. The young girl whispered words of comfort and love, promising that everything would be all right. It was the first time in months that she had felt a lightness in her heart, a hope that her mother would recover fully. The doctors assured her that with the surgery, her mother's life could return to normal. The girl nodded silently, tears welling up as she imagined the day her mother would come home, strong and healthy. During the hospital stay, she found moments to play the piano in the small waiting area. The music brought calm to the space, and nurses and visitors often stopped to listen. Even in a hospital full of anxious families, her simple tunes carried hope and warmth. People would approach her, asking if she had formal training. When she said she had learned by listening and practicing quietly, they were amazed. It was not just her skill that impressed them. It was the emotion in every note, the sincerity of a girl who had been through so much yet played with joy and heart. The millionaire judge remained involved in her journey. He visited the hospital, ensuring that her mother was receiving the best care possible. He also encouraged her to continue her musical education, offering scholarships and opportunities to study under skilled teachers. The girl felt a mix of gratitude and determination. She had always loved the piano, but now she understood that music could not only bring her joy but also create real change in people's lives. It had saved her mother's life and touched hearts along the way. When her mother was finally discharged from the hospital, the reunion was filled with emotion. Her mother embraced her tightly, whispering words of love and pride. The girl could feel the strength returning to her mother's body and heart. Walking home together, they held hands, savoring each moment of peace and normalcy that had been so rare in their lives. The small house they returned to felt brighter, warmer, and filled with possibility. The girl's music continued to echo through the rooms, a soundtrack of resilience, hope, and love. The community took notice of her journey. People who had watched her compete or heard her play in the hospital began to offer support. Teachers, neighbors, and even strangers sent messages of encouragement, praising her talent and her courage. The young girl, once quiet and unnoticed, became an inspiration. She would often play small concerts in the community center, sharing her music with others, teaching younger children, and spreading hope through her melodies. Each performance reminded her that her music had power far beyond what she had imagined. The millionaire judge, who had once been a stern and distant figure, became a mentor and a guide. He taught her about discipline, the importance of consistency, and how to balance her passion with life's responsibilities. He never overshadowed her voice but helped her grow, encouraging her to find her own path in music and in life. His mentorship was a gift, a way to ensure that her talent could reach its full potential. Together, they planned small events where she could perform and inspire other children who faced challenges similar to her own. Months passed, and the girl's mother regained her strength fully. Life returned to a sense of normalcy, but the experience had changed them both. The young girl had discovered her inner strength, and her mother had been given a second chance at life. Music had been the bridge that carried them from fear and uncertainty to hope and healing. The bond between them had grown stronger, deeper, and more resilient than ever. The young girl's journey continued with music at the center of her life. She studied under skilled teachers, participated in competitions, and performed in small concerts to share her story. Each note she played carried her experiences, her love for her mother, and the courage she had found within herself. Her music was no longer just a pastime. It was her voice, her message, and her way of making the world a little brighter. The community recognized her achievements, and she became a symbol of hope for children facing challenges. People often spoke of the girl who played a simple tune and, through her courage and heart, saved her mother and stunned a millionaire judge. Her story reminded everyone that talent alone is not what changes the world. It is courage, determination, and the power of the heart. Years later, she continued to play, her music more beautiful and expressive than ever. The judge, now a trusted friend and mentor, would attend her performances, always proud of how far she had come. Her mother, healthy and vibrant, would sit in the front row, beaming with pride and love. They had faced hardship together, and music had guided them through it. The simple tune that had once been a quiet expression of hope had grown into a melody that touched countless lives. The young girl had learned that even the smallest actions, like playing a simple tune with love, could create enormous change. She had discovered the value of courage, the importance of family, and the power of heart. Her story became an inspiration, a reminder that no matter the circumstances, hope, love, and determination could overcome the greatest obstacles. And as she played, her fingers dancing over the keys, she felt the joy and fulfillment that comes from sharing one's heart with the world, knowing that her music would always carry her story forward.